In the small village of Nkosi, Zola sat by a flickering oil lamp night after night, stitching together pieces of lace, cloth, and old fabric she had collected over the years. She didn't have money for a store-bought wedding dress, but she had love in her heart and a dream in her hands. Every thread, every patch, every bit of that dress was made with care. It wasn't perfect, not by rich people's standards, but to Zola it was beautiful. When the villagers saw her creation, the whispers began. Some laughed quietly behind her back. Others called it a rag dress, saying she should be ashamed to wear something so poor on the most important day of her life. But Zola didn't let it break her. On her wedding day, she walked through the village with her head high, wearing the dress she made with her own hands. She smiled even though she could feel their eyes judging her. She believed love mattered more than lace, more than money. What Zola didn't know was that this same dress, the one people mocked, would one day be her crown. It wasn't just a wedding dress. It was a symbol of strength, of resilience, of a woman who refused to be broken by shame. That dress, once a target of gossip, would later walk into courtrooms, grace magazine covers, and spark a movement. But on that first day, it was simply a bride's hope sewn into every stitch. The sun was shining in Nkosi, and Zola stood under the big acacia tree where her wedding was meant to take place. She wore the dress she had made with her own hands, the same one people had whispered about, calling it cheap and ugly. Still, she waited with hope in her heart. She believed love would win, that Munya, her fiancé, would show up and everything would be worth it. Minutes passed. Then hours. The music slowed down, the guests grew restless, and her smile started to fade. Zola kept looking down the road, praying to see Munya walking toward her. But he never came. At first, people thought maybe something bad had happened. Maybe he got sick. Maybe there was an accident. But soon someone's phone buzzed with a photo. Munya, in a shiny tuxedo, was already married. To another woman. A wealthier one. He had left Zola without a word, without even the courage to face her. The guests gasped. Then came the laughter. Some pointed. Others whispered louder now. No wonder he didn't show. Look at her dress. Did she really think she could get married looking like that? Zola stood frozen, humiliated. Her heart was shattered, but the mocking cut even deeper. The very people she grew up around were now laughing at her pain. She didn't cry, not in front of them. She just picked up the hem of her dress, turned around and walked away slowly, one step at a time. Each step felt heavier than the last. That night, alone in her small room, Zola sat on the floor still wearing her dress. She stared at the wall in silence. Her dreams had fallen apart in public, and now she had to face the truth. Not just about Munya, but about the world. People didn't just leave, they laughed while doing it. Her heart was broken, her pride torn apart, but something inside her refused to die. She didn't know it yet, but that awful day was the beginning of something far greater. A storm was coming, and she would be at the center of it. After Munya disappeared, Zola thought the worst was over. Her heart was broken, but at least she could start healing. But then the phone calls started. Then letters. Then men knocking at her door asking for money. That's when Zola learned the truth. Munya had taken out loans in her name. He had borrowed money from banks, shops, even a few dangerous lenders in the city, all using her details. He had promised it was for their future. Their wedding, their life together. But in the end he ran off with another woman and left her with everything. The shame, the embarrassment, and now the debts. Zola tried to explain that she hadn't signed anything. But the papers had her name, her ID, even her signature, forged so well that no one believed her. The moneylenders didn't care about her story. They wanted their money. Some came shouting, others threatening. One day, a man even stood in front of her small tailoring shop and started yelling in front of customers, calling her a liar and a thief. People stopped coming. Within weeks she had to shut it down. Her sewing machine was taken. Her savings were gone. The shop she had worked so hard to build, brick by brick, fell apart in front of her eyes. She had nothing left except her wedding dress, the same one people laughed at. But now it wasn't just a joke. It was a wound, a reminder of everything she lost. Every time she opened her wardrobe and saw it folded there, she felt pain in her chest. She thought about burning it, throwing it away, anything to forget. But something stopped her. Maybe a quiet voice inside saying, "Not yet." Zola moved through each day like a ghost, tired, numb and alone. The village that once called her strong now saw her as cursed. People crossed the street when they saw her coming. The same ones who laughed at her dress now gossiped about her debts. She had lost her business, her pride, her name, but somewhere deep inside, a small fire still burned. Zola packed her life into one small bag and left Nkosi. There was nothing left for her there. No shop, no friends, no hope. She took a bus to Lusaka, the big city, with only a little money in her pocket and the weight of shame on her back. But she was determined to start over. No one in Lusaka knew her story. That, at least, was a small comfort. She found a small space at a local market and began selling fabric. It wasn't much, but it was something. Each day she woke up before sunrise, set up her little stall, and smiled at customers, even when her heart still ached. People slowly began to notice her. Her eye for color, her calm presence, the way she helped each woman imagine their dream dress, piece by piece. One afternoon, a man stopped at her stall looking for fabric for his wife. He was well-dressed, polite, and curious. As they talked, he mentioned he was a lawyer. Zola didn't know why, but something made her open up a little. She told him part of her story about Munya, the wedding, the loans. The man paused. He asked if she had any of the documents left. She did. She always carried copies in a worn folder just in case. She handed them to him, not expecting anything. But the moment he looked at them, his face changed. "These signatures," he said quietly, "they don't match. And this loan, this is illegal. There are serious problems here." Zola's heart skipped. She had told this story to others before, and no one listened. But this man, this stranger, was seeing something new. Something real. He asked if she'd let him investigate further. She nodded, not really knowing what it meant. But suddenly, for the first time in a long time, there was a small crack of light breaking through the darkness. That evening, as she packed up her stall, Zola held the folder in her hands with new eyes. Maybe the dress hadn't ruined her life. Maybe it had led her here, to the very place where her fight for justice would begin. The night before the court hearing, Zola sat on the floor of her small room in Lusaka, staring at the old wooden trunk at the foot of her bed. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside was the dress, the one that had once held so many dreams and then so much pain. It was the dress people laughed at. The dress she was wearing when Munya left her at the altar. The dress that had come to represent everything she wanted to forget. But now it meant something else. Zola slowly lifted the lid. There it was, folded neatly, still carrying the smell of old fabric and time. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She didn't cry. Not this time. She looked at the stitching, the tiny thread she had sewn by hand, late into the night dreaming of love. And then she looked at herself in the mirror, holding it against her. A thought came to her, bold and strange. What if I wear this to court? Not as a victim. As a statement. She didn't have fancy clothes. She didn't have a lawyer's suit or anything that looked powerful. But she had this. The same dress they mocked would now be the one she walked into court with. Not to cry in. To fight in. To show the world what they tried to break but couldn't. On the morning of the trial, Zola slipped the dress over her head. Fit differently now. She wasn't the same girl who had waited under that tree in Nkosi. This time her back was straighter. Her chin higher. She wrapped a scarf around her hair and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. She didn't see shame anymore. She saw strength. As she stepped onto the street, heads turned. Some stared, confused. Others whispered. But Zola didn't care. She walked to the courthouse slowly, with quiet purpose. Each step in that dress was a message. I remember everything. I am not afraid. And I am not hiding anymore. The dress wasn't just a piece of clothing anymore. It was her armor, stitched with pain, yes, but also with power. And this time everyone would see it. The courtroom was packed that morning. People had heard whispers about the case. Something about a woman suing her ex-fiancé for fraud. But no one expected what they saw when Zola walked through the doors. She wasn't wearing a suit. She wasn't trying to blend in. She walked in slowly, wearing that dress. The old wedding dress stitched from scraps and lace. The same one people once laughed at. The room went silent. Heads turned. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Even the judge looked up from his papers, eyebrows raised. Some thought it was a joke. Others just stared. unsure of what to make of it. But Zola kept her head high. Her heart was racing, but her steps were steady. This time she wasn't here to be mocked. She was here to be heard. She sat down with her lawyer, the same one who had found the forged documents at her fabric stall months ago. As the hearing began, her story unfolded piece by painful piece. The court listened to how Munya had taken loans in her name without her knowing, how he had signed contracts using a fake signature that almost fooled everyone, how she had been left to deal with the debt, the shame, and the loss. Then came the documents. The lawyer laid them out, one by one, showing side-by-side comparisons of Zola's real signature and the forged ones. The difference was clear now. The truth couldn't hide anymore. There were gasps in the courtroom, quiet at first, then louder as more evidence was shown. Even the judge leaned forward, surprised by the level of deception. But it wasn't just about the money. Zola had suffered emotional abuse, humiliation in front of her entire village, and years of struggle because of one man's betrayal. Her lawyer spoke with calm fire, pointing to the dress. They laughed at her for wearing this. They said it made her a joke. But today it stands as proof that she survived, that she never gave up. When Zola stood to speak, her voice didn't shake. "This dress was once my shame," she said softly. "But now it's my strength." Munya walked into the courtroom with a smirk on his face and a shiny suit that looked more expensive than most people's cars. He had become rich over the years, big house, big car, and even bigger ego. He didn't look nervous in fact, when he saw Zola sitting there in her old wedding dress, he laughed under his breath and whispered to his lawyer, loud enough for others to hear, "She still thinks she's in some village play." But Zola didn't flinch. She just looked straight ahead, calm and still. As the hearing continued, the truth unfolded in full view of everyone. The forged signatures, the lies, the fake loans, and the emotional damage he had caused. The courtroom heard how Munya had used Zola's name to get ahead and then abandoned her when he no longer needed her. His lawyer tried to spin it, saying Zola had agreed to everything. But the evidence was too strong, too clear. Then came the judge's ruling. It hit like thunder. First, the court declared all the debts in Zola's name null and void. Then, they announced that Munya's personal and business accounts would be frozen, effective immediately. His properties, including a fancy car and 2 luxury apartments, would be seized for investigation. And finally, the court awarded Zola a $1 million settlement for emotional and financial damages. Munya's face changed instantly. The smirk vanished. His mouth opened slightly in disbelief. The man who once laughed at Zola's ragged dress now looked like the joke. His empire, built on lies and stolen identity, was falling apart right there in front of him. Zola didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just stood tall, in the same dress everyone once called worthless. Now it had walked her through the fire and out the other side. As reporters waited outside and cameras flashed, people started talking. Not about Munya's fall, but about Zola's rise. The woman who was once humiliated at the altar had turned her pain into justice. And the dress? It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was history. The day after the court ruling, someone snapped a photo of Zola walking out of the courthouse in her handmade wedding dress, head high, face calm, surrounded by flashing cameras. That photo hit the internet like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere. People didn't see a poor woman in a ragged dress anymore. They saw a warrior. A woman who stood in court, in the very dress she was mocked in and won. Social media exploded. Tweets, videos, and hashtags spread across platforms. "Justice in Lace," one headline read. "She wore the same dress they laughed at, and took down the man who betrayed her," another said. Influencers posted about it. Fashion pages shared close-ups of her stitching. Even legal blogs broke down the case, calling it one of the boldest personal protests they had ever seen. Zola hadn't planned any of this. She just wanted her life back. But somehow her quiet courage touched something deep in people. Brides from around the world sent her messages, some crying, some thanking her for reminding them that dignity doesn't come from money, it comes from self-worth. She was invited to interviews, podcasts, talk shows. People asked about the dress, the case, and her strength, but what touched her the most were the letters from young girls in villages who said, "You gave me hope," and from women who wrote, "You made me believe in myself again." Even high-end magazines that once wouldn't look twice at someone like her now wanted her on their pages. Not just for fashion but for the story behind the thread. Zola wasn't trying to be famous. But somehow her pain had turned into power, and the world had taken notice. She didn't smile because she was proud of the suffering. She smiled because the thing that once broke her was now lifting others. The same dress they said wasn't good enough had become a flag not just of survival, but of victory. It was never just about fabric. It was about a woman who refused to stay quiet, who showed up in the same dress they laughed at and made the whole world listen. With the settlement money finally in her hands, Zola had every reason to disappear, to live quietly, away from the stares, the questions, the past. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She had been broken, mocked, abandoned, and still stood tall. And now she had a chance to do something bigger than herself. Something that could turn her story into a lifeline for others. She sat down with a notebook and a pen. No lawyers. No advisors. Just a dream. On the first page she wrote 2 words, "Mock me now." That would be the name of her fashion label. Not just a brand but a message. She remembered how it felt. Wearing that dress made from scraps, walking past people who laughed at her, being told she wasn't enough. Now she wanted to create dresses for brides who had dreams but not dollars. Girls like her, who had love in their hearts but little in their wallets. Every dress would be beautiful, affordable, and made with the same care she had stitched into her own. She rented a small studio in Lusaka, bought sewing machines, hired 2 young women who had once been street vendors. She taught them, worked beside them, shared her story. Slowly, the first collection came to life. Soft fabrics, bold details, each dress with a small hidden patch inside that read, "Mock me now." People didn't just buy the dresses, they bought into the story. Orders came in from across the country, then beyond. Women posted photos in their gowns, sharing their own struggles, their own triumphs. Some had left abusive marriages, some were survivors of poverty, heartbreak, or shame. Zola's brand gave them more than a dress. It gave them voice, pride, and power. She was invited to fashion weeks, featured in magazines, and called a pioneer. But what mattered most to her was the girl who walked into her shop in Nkosi, holding her mother's hand, and asked, "Are you the lady from the photo? The one in the brave dress?" Zola smiled. "Yes," she said. "And now I make brave dresses for everyone." Years after that painful wedding day, Zola finally returned to Nkosi. This time she wasn't walking with shame or tears. She came in a clean white van filled with boxes, each one holding handmade wedding gowns from her fashion brand, Mock Me Now. The same road she once walked with her head down now echoed with children's laughter, curious eyes, and whispers of, "She's back." But Zola didn't return to prove anything. She didn't come to show off her success. She came with love in her heart and gifts in her hands, gowns for brides in the village who couldn't afford much, just like she once couldn't. Dresses stitched with care, beauty, and meaning. Dresses that said, "You are enough." Women gathered under the old acacia tree, the same place where she had once waited for Munya to arrive. They hugged her, some with tears in their eyes, some with silent apologies written in their faces. She didn't hold grudges. She had healed. Now she wanted others to dream again too. One little girl tugged gently at Zola's dress and asked shyly, "Is that the same dress from the photo?" Zola knelt down and smiled warmly. "Yes," she said. "They mocked it, but it changed my life." The villagers clapped. Some cried. And in that moment it wasn't about revenge or riches. It was about full circles. About rising without bitterness. About using pain to lift others. And as the sun set over Nkosi, Zola stood where it all began. No longer the girl in the ragged dress, but the woman who turned it into a legacy.